It was still dark on the morning of January 19th, 2002, in the quiet town of Santomera, Spain. Inside a small house, two little boys were asleep in bed next to their mother. Everything seemed calm until something terrible happened. By sunrise, police were at the house, and the peaceful neighborhood was in shock. No one could believe what had taken place overnight. What really happened inside that home? And how did a mother end up at the center of such a heartbreaking story? Francisca Gonzalez was born in 1966 in the small town of Santomera, located in Murcia, Spain. She grew up in a deeply religious community, in a home with her parents, two sisters, and a brother. Life in Santomera revolved around Catholic traditions and conservative values, but behind the pious exterior, not everything was serene in her household. Reports suggest that her father struggled with alcoholism, which likely cast a shadow over her formative years. Francisca completed her basic education and became known for her attention to appearance from a young age. This focus on her image intensified after a comment from her brother about her weight. According to her mother, Francisca had several romantic relationships during her teenage years, including one with a wealthy foreigner, though she was never drawn to material comfort alone. At 18, she met José Ruiz Nicolá, known as Pepe, and the two quickly became romantically involved. After nearly 2 years of dating, Francisca became pregnant, and the couple entered a civil marriage in 1987. Their first child, José Carlos, was born soon after. Francisca would later recount that Pepe had a history of soliciting sex workers for group encounters, a lifestyle he attempted to leave behind during their courtship. However, after their marriage, those tendencies resurfaced. He introduced her to a world of partner swapping and outings to clubs catering to similar interests. In 1996, 9 years after their civil ceremony, the couple solemnized their marriage in the Catholic Church with a large celebration. That same year, their second son, Francisco Miguel, was born, followed by a third, Adrián, in 1998. While their family expanded, so too did the turmoil in their home. Pepe's job as an international truck driver meant he was away for long periods, leaving Francisca to manage the household alone. His prolonged absences stirred deep jealousy in Francisca. She began tracking his movements, sometimes even in disguise and by taxi. Their arguments escalated, both over the phone and in person, sometimes erupting into physical altercations. Francisca later described enduring psychological abuse. Feeling abandoned, she turned to compulsive shopping and invested heavily in clothes and lingerie, hoping to reignite her husband's interest despite her deep resentment. Her emotional instability worsened. Francisca developed a dependence on alcohol and drugs, substances that, according to later revelations, were frequently present in the household. Between 1990 and 1999, medical records documented her struggles with anxiety, insomnia, and anemia. Amid her breakdown, her children bore the brunt. Francisca became harsh and physically violent, far from the nurturing figure they needed. By 2002, the oldest son, José Carlos, then 14, had taken on the role of caregiver for his younger brothers. He was responsible not just for supervising them, but also for their basic needs, like meals and hygiene. The home environment had become deeply unstable, yet no one could foresee the horror about to unfold. Francisca, convinced her husband was still unfaithful, followed him to a business park where she believed she saw him with another woman. This incident, some say, was the final fracture in an already crumbling marriage. When Pepe announced he was leaving for a trucking job in France, Francisca issued a chilling threat. She would hurt him more than he had ever hurt her. He left, but their fights continued by phone. Back home, she sank deeper into substance abuse. On Friday, January 18, 2002, she stayed in bed with flu symptoms, but later took her children to the park. That night, as Jose Carlos watched over the household, the younger boys slept in the marital bed with their mother. In the early hours of Saturday, January 19th, the silence of the house was shattered by the screams of the younger children. Jose Carlos awoke but stayed in bed, assuming it was another episode of maternal punishment. Violence had become such a norm that he didn't suspect the danger. The morning brought three differing accounts of what occurred. One version states that Jose Carlos tried to wake his brothers and found them lifeless. Terrified, he ran to alert nearby relatives while Francisca called the police. Another narrative claims he awoke to unusual sounds and discovered the gruesome scene himself. A third suggests that Francisca woke him, alleging a robbery had occurred and urging him to seek help. When authorities arrived, the sight was horrifying. The two boys lay in the master bed, bearing visible signs of violence. Bruises and pressure marks indicated asphyxiation. Investigators immediately focused on understanding what happened during the night and who was responsible. Francisca initially said that a group of Ecuadorian men had broken into the home through the balcony window with intent to rob. She claimed to have attempted to defend her children using a can of pepper spray, which the intruders wrestled from her before rendering her unconscious. This, she said, explained her inability to protect her sons. One of the officers later shared in an interview that although Francisca appeared agitated, she did not seem overtaken by grief. More concerning, however, was her attempt to direct the officers' attention toward very specific clues, raising suspicions that she was trying to steer the investigation. While Francisca and her surviving son received psychological support from Murcia's social services, the police began collecting statements from extended family and neighbors. As soon as Francisca was physically stable, she was taken to the Forensic Institute for a medical evaluation. The examination aimed to assess the alleged effects of the paralyzing gas she claimed had been used on her, as well as the scratches found on her wrists and face. Initial reports revealed that during her emergency call, Francisca repeatedly cried that her children had been taken from her. Her husband, who was abroad at the time, immediately began his journey back to Santomera upon hearing the devastating news. In her earliest testimony, Francisca alleged that intruders had not only killed her children but also stolen several pieces of jewelry. She claimed that in the days leading up to the attack, unfamiliar foreign men had been loitering near the house. She even said she had changed the door lock days earlier after finding it tampered with. Among the theories she offered to detectives was that the attack could have been a message, an act of retribution tied to her husband's alleged involvement in drug trafficking, but her version of events soon began to unravel. As investigators pressed her for details, contradictions emerged. At first she said two men broke in. Later it was just one. She claimed the scratches on her face came from a struggle, yet she also insisted the assailants wore gloves. The inconsistencies multiplied. After 12 hours of questioning, suspicion had shifted squarely onto Francisca herself. Statements from her son Jose Carlos and from neighbors further weakened her claims. They described her as emotionally unstable and prone to violent outbursts. Then came the autopsy results. The time of death for the two boys was placed between 2 and 3 a.m., hours before the time Francisca had claimed the supposed burglary took place. Further forensic analysis added more damning evidence. Tissue found beneath the children's fingernails did not match either of the boys. It was later confirmed through DNA to belong to their mother. Additionally, Francisca's own medical exam contradicted her story. She showed none of the physical symptoms typically associated with exposure to a paralyzing agent, no throat or eye irritation, no respiratory issues. And then, another blow to her narrative. During a search of the house, officers discovered the supposedly stolen jewelry hidden in couch cushions. A blonde wig and 9,000 euros in cash were also recovered from the property, suggesting premeditation. Investigators recalled an important detail shared by Jose Carlos during the initial interviews. On the evening before the tragedy, Francisca had asked him to go out and buy batteries for his Walkman. Seemingly innocent, this request was later interpreted as an attempt to ensure the teenager's room was filled with music, blocking out any sounds from the crime she was about to commit. It also surfaced that Francisca had requested her housekeeper come by the next morning, a move interpreted by police as a calculated effort to clean up potential evidence. In her written declaration, Francisca claimed that during the early morning hours, she had been awake exchanging text messages with her husband. Around sunrise, she said, she heard glass shattering. Opening her bedroom door, she claimed to have encountered a gloved man whom she attempted to fend off with a canister of spray and a knife hidden beneath the bed. The man, according to her, overpowered her and sprayed her unconscious. When she came to, her children were dead and some jewelry was missing. But investigators quickly determined her story didn't hold up. They reconstructed the timeline and concluded it was physically impossible for everything she described to have occurred in the brief time frame she outlined. Despite growing suspicion, authorities did not arrest her immediately. They allowed her to attend the funeral where she appeared heartbroken and composed, standing beside her estranged husband, both consumed by grief. Only one day after the funeral, the police arrested Francisca. The woman who had just wept for her children was now being taken into custody as the prime suspect in their deaths. Pepe and Jose Carlos watched in disbelief as she was placed into the back of a police vehicle, just 48 hours after burying the boys. It didn't take long for the facade to collapse. Under pressure during a formal interrogation, Francisca broke down and admitted to killing her two youngest sons. But even as she confessed, she sought to deflect full responsibility. Her defense hinged on the claim that a potent mix of alcohol, cocaine, and tranquilizers had clouded her judgment in the hours leading up to the tragedy. She described waking after 7 a.m., dazed from the substances, and discovering her children lifeless beside her. According to her statement, she wandered through the house to confirm whether an intruder had entered. Finding no signs of forced entry, she concluded, horrifyingly, that she must have been the one responsible. Still, moments after this admission, she contradicted herself again, asserting that she had genuinely believed at first that strangers had broken into the house, a belief she blamed on the hallucinatory effects of the drugs. The timeline reconstructed by authorities was chilling. Around 2 a.m., Francisca is believed to have entered her bedroom. She first attacked her middle child, using a mobile phone charger cable to strangle him. The boy fought back, leaving scratch marks on her body. Despite his resistance, She overpowered him. Then she turned to the youngest and repeated the act. As the legal process advanced, her defense team proposed that she be transferred to a psychiatric facility. The court approved the request. Evaluated by forensic psychiatrists, Francisca was described as cold, manipulative, immature, and egocentric. She craved attention, they wrote, and demonstrated emotional instability, controlling behavior and aggressive tendencies. They noted paranoid and narcissistic personality traits and remarked on her lack of interest in maintaining social or familial harmony. Still, Francisca continued to frame herself as a victim. In her first statement to the judge, she blamed her actions on years of psychological torment. She described 2001 as a year of unrelenting emotional deterioration, citing humiliation, threats, and verbal abuse from her husband. She claimed that Pepe had pushed her into partner swapping clubs and maintained a year-long affair that ended just before the murders. Her substance abuse, she argued, was rooted in trauma. She also asserted that their family had been in danger due to Pepe's alleged involvement in drug trafficking. She recounted an incident where a stranger pointed a gun at Pepe's head, claiming this terrifying encounter had prompted her to prepare for a possible escape. It was, she explained, the reason she purchased a blonde wig and hid €9,000 in cash, the same items later seized by police. These were not tools for a crime, she insisted, but a contingency plan. Francisca denied any premeditation. She claimed that if she had intended to flee, she would have done so. The idea of staging a robbery only came to her when she awoke to find her sons dead, she said, not before. She insisted she never meant to harm her kids, and reiterated that she had no memory of her actions that night due to a heavy mix of 5 grams of cocaine, sleeping pills, and several glasses of whiskey. She denied that the murders were intended to hurt her husband, saying there had been far more effective opportunities to do so if that had been her goal. As for Pepe, he maintained a measured position. He acknowledged the infidelity, admitted he had spent too much time away from home because of work, and blamed himself for not noticing the signs earlier. He recounted how Francisca began smelling of alcohol and making small weekly withdrawals from their shared account. Despite their estrangement, he claimed she had loved him obsessively and insisted she would never have harmed the children had she not been under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Pepe even revealed he had once considered seeking psychiatric help for her, a decision he now regretted not following through on. In the face of unimaginable loss, guilt, and confusion, he found himself trying to make sense of the woman he thought he knew, and the mother who had become a killer. Then, another layer of complexity emerged. According to judicial sources cited by local newspapers, Francisca was allegedly involved in a romantic relationship with a businessman from Murcia. This man, whose identity was never revealed, was described as someone she was deeply in love with, a claim that stood in stark contrast to her obsessive surveillance of her husband. Investigators found multiple phone calls between Francisco and this mystery man in the days leading up to the killings, including one placed just minutes after the murders. While the content of the call was never made public, some sources speculated that the extramarital affair may have fueled a desire for revenge. Francisca denied everything. She claimed the alleged lover never existed and accused her husband of fabricating stories to portray her as unstable and discredit her accusations of abuse. Amid swirling rumors and unresolved questions, Francisca remained in pretrial detention until her court proceedings began in October 2003. In the opening hearing, she reiterated that she had no recollection of killing her children, blaming the state of intoxication she was in that night. She said that upon finding them unresponsive, She had attempted mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. She described how her pajamas were soaked in sweat and removed them in panic. Once again, she blamed Pepe, claiming he had threatened and psychologically tormented her. She even denied having confessed the crime to police, saying she had been too intoxicated to remember anything clearly, even whether she had been alone in the house that night. She portrayed herself as a responsible mother and insisted that she no longer used drugs in prison, but confessed she was not mentally or emotionally fit to be released. During the trial, her eldest son, Jose Carlos, gave difficult testimony. He recalled waking up that night to the sound of his younger brothers shouting that they couldn't breathe. He didn't intervene. He assumed, tragically, that it was another episode of their mother's violence, a routine they had sadly grown used to. The prosecution laid out the evidence meticulously. They argued that Francisca had staged the crime scene to resemble a robbery and highlighted the forensic findings that proved she had been in control of her actions. The defense did not dispute the deaths, but insisted that drug use had rendered her incapable of understanding what she was doing. The prosecution dismantled this argument, presenting psychiatric evaluations stating that Francisca had been fully aware of her actions and the fatal consequences. The verdict was unanimous. Francisca Gonzalez, then 37, was found guilty of the double murder. The jury concluded that she had planned the crime in advance and that her use of drugs and alcohol did not impair her judgment. Psychiatric experts testified that she did not suffer from any psychological disorders that would absolve her of responsibility. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive 20-year prison terms, 40 years total. The court also ordered her to pay €200,000 in compensation to Pepe and €40,000 to Jose Carlos. Francisca began her sentence at the Sangonera prison in Murcia. Her cold demeanor and lack of visible emotion left a chilling impression. Initially met with hostility, she eventually earned a degree of respect from fellow inmates for her discipline and literacy. She offered to write legal documents for other prisoners in exchange for money, turning her skills into a prison economy. Despite the sentence, Francisca maintained her physical appearance. She was always well-kept, polished, and meticulous about hygiene. She divorced Pepe shortly after sentencing and reportedly entered into relationships with at least 3 men, also incarcerated. Over the years, she was transferred between different facilities, but continued to be described as a model inmate. In 2016, she was granted a temporary weekend release. Then, in July 2020, nearly 17 years after her conviction, Francisca was granted a form of semi-freedom that allowed her to serve the remainder of her sentence outside prison under supervision. But freedom didn't last. In April 2022, authorities revoked her status after discovering she had not been staying at the residence she provided. She was sent back to prison. Later, it emerged that she had also violated release terms by consuming drugs. Though some privileges were later reinstated, for a time she was again barred from any temporary leave. Jose Carlos continued living in the same house where the murders occurred. By 2022, he had a family of his own, his wife and 2 children living in the very home where he lost his siblings. The property had once been offered for sale, but no one wanted to buy it, even at a fraction of its value. It remained in the family. As for Pepe, he reportedly left Spain for a time after the tragedy, but eventually returned. He has kept a low profile. Francisca remains incarcerated. Rumors circulated that she had married her defense attorney, but these were denied. Her story remains one of the most disturbing family crimes in Spanish history, not only for the brutality of the act, but also for her cold rationalizations, shifting narratives, and disturbing composure. For many, it is incomprehensible that a mother could plan and carry out such a crime. Whether it was revenge, desperation, or delusion, only Francisca knows the real motive. And whether she truly doesn't remember or simply chooses not to remains a question that will likely never be answered. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.